In less than a minute, a 30-year campaign for absolute royal supremacy evaporated in the reflection of $135 million worth of diamonds and pearls. It happened at Windsor Castle on the evening of March 18, 2026. The occasion was the Nigerian State Banquet, a glittering diplomatic set piece designed to project the enduring stability of the British monarchy. Queen Camilla arrived draped in the late Queen Elizabeth's Belgian sapphire tiara, armored in the undeniable legal proof of her ultimate victory. But what Camilla realized behind closed doors, as the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted and the cameras physically pivoted away from her, is a cold and devastating truth. You can wear the crown, you can rewrite the official website, and you can demand the bows. But you cannot force the world to forget the woman who was meant to wear them first. This is the story of a silent, ruthless institutional execution. We are going to unpack the secret power grab Camilla attempted during the monarchy's most vulnerable hour, how Prince William and Princess Catherine uncovered the maneuver and the devastating soundless retaliation that followed. By the end of this, you will understand the profound difference between the illusion of absolute power and the staggering commercial desperation of a woman who has suddenly realized she actually owns nothing. To understand the magnitude of this humiliation, we must first rebuild the illusion of power that Camilla spent 3 decades carefully constructing. For years, she was the ultimate architect of her own redemption arc. She survived the bitter fallout of the 1990s, weathered the tragic death of Princess Diana, and slowly, meticulously, clawed her way from the most despised woman in Britain to the side of the king. This was not an accident. It was a masterclass in psychological public relations and administrative warfare. Camilla operated under the assumption that time and persistence would eventually erase Diana's legacy. Once the Queen passed away and Charles ascended the throne, Camilla felt she had finally crossed the threshold into absolute, untouchable security. She had the Archbishop of Canterbury's blessing, she had the crown placed upon her head at Westminster Abbey, and most importantly, she believed she had Charles completely controlled. In her mind, the transition was complete. She began to elevate her non-royal children, pushing them into the royal spotlight, testing the boundaries of protocol, and securing her family's proximity to the throne. She felt invincible, insulated by the heavy velvet ropes of the institution she had successfully infiltrated. But this illusion of absolute power required a specific environment to thrive. It required a compliant, quiet, younger generation. What Camilla failed to recognize was that her ultimate victory was fundamentally hollow. She held the title of Queen Consort, but the actual tangible power, the sprawling estates, the billion-dollar Duchy of Cornwall, and the fierce protective devotion of the global public belonged entirely to Prince William. And William is a man who carries the silent, enduring grief for his mother not as a burden, but as a heavily guarded fortress. The trigger for this silent warfare occurred during the darkest months of 2024, when Princess Catherine was diagnosed with cancer and forced to retreat from public life. The monarchy faced a terrifying vacuum of glamour and stability. Instead of stepping back to allow the family to heal, Camilla reportedly saw an opportunity to consolidate her narrative. What appeared to be routine administrative updates during Catherine's absence were actually subtle, calculated maneuvers to center Camilla as the undisputed solitary matriarch of the firm. There were whispers of reshuffled patronages, quiet attempts to secure long-term financial independence for her own lineage, and a concerted effort to push the Wales family into the background while they were too vulnerable to fight back. Camilla assumed that Catherine was too weak to resist, and that William was too consumed by personal trauma to notice the quiet dismantling of his wife's institutional footprint. It was a staggering miscalculation. William and Catherine did not scream. They did not leak tearful complaints to the press. They did not engage in the trashy commercial desperation that so often plagues those adjacent to the crown. Instead, they utilized the cold, majestic machinery of the palace to execute a masterstroke of revenge. They waited. The retaliation was not delivered through a press release, but through a calculated visual execution at the Nigerian State Banquet. This brings us back to that fateful night in March 2026. Princess Catherine, having survived her grueling medical battle, made her triumphant return to full diplomatic duty. But it was not just her presence that shattered Camilla's carefully constructed empire. It was what she chose to place upon her head. Catherine arrived wearing the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara. This is not just a piece of jewelry, valued at an estimated $135 million. The Lover's Knot is soaked in history, grief, and palace politics. Originally created in 1913 for Queen Mary, it was passed down to Queen Elizabeth, who famously loaned it to Princess Diana as a wedding gift. Despite its crushing weight, which notoriously gave Diana severe headaches, it became her signature crown, the visual shorthand for the people's princess. But when Charles and Diana divorced, the institution demanded it back. The tiara was stripped from Diana because it belonged to the title of the Princess of Wales, not the woman. For nearly 20 years, it sat in a dark vault, a radioactive symbol of the palace's greatest failure. When Catherine wears the Lover's Knot, she is not merely accessorizing a Givenchy gown. She is executing a highly sophisticated institutional strike. Every time those 19 dangling Baroque pearls catch the light, they act as a forensic proof of shifting power. William and Catherine know exactly what that tiara represents to the public, and more importantly, what it represents to Camilla. By crowning Catherine with Diana's most iconic possession, William is honoring his mother's memory while simultaneously reinforcing his wife's rightful unshakable place at the apex of the royal hierarchy. It is a visual reminder that Catherine is the true heir to the affection and the power that Camilla has spent 30 years trying to steal. The psychological impact on Camilla inside that banquet hall was devastating. There she stood, the legally anointed queen, adorned in the spectacular Belgian sapphire tiara. On paper, she outranked everyone in the room. But in the brutal, unforgiving currency of global relevance, she was rendered entirely invisible. Within minutes of Catherine stepping into the light, social media algorithms across the globe erupted. Side by side, images of Catherine and Diana flooded the internet. The international press ignored the Queen Consort entirely, focusing their lenses exclusively on the spectacular, glittering resurrection of the Princess of Wales. That detail matters. That is where the story changes. Because in that precise moment, the grand illusion of Camilla's power shattered. What looked like a routine royal photo opportunity was actually a total dismantling of her empire. She realized with cold, dawning horror that she could never win this war. She realized that despite all the strategic PR campaigns, the backroom deals, and the forced smiles, she is merely a temporary placeholder in a dynasty that fundamentally belongs to William. The trap had snapped shut. William and Catherine had successfully weaponized the very protocol that Camilla had used to climb to the top. By strictly adhering to the rules, by claiming the tiara that rightfully belongs to the Princess of Wales, Catherine delivered a fatal blow to Camilla's ego without ever uttering a single word. Camilla was left standing in a room full of diplomats wearing borrowed jewels, suddenly suffocated by the staggering realization that her legacy will forever be defined not by what she achieved, but by the ghost of the woman she tried to replace. She looked toward her husband, the king, hoping for an intervention, a gesture, a command to stop the visual humiliation unfolding before their eyes. But what she met was a silence that would change the trajectory of her remaining years in the palace. That silence from King Charles was not just a failure of a husband to protect his wife. It was the ultimate institutional betrayal. As Camilla stood in the glittering expanse of Windsor Castle, eclipsed by the visual reincarnation of Princess Diana, she looked to Charles for a lifeline. A simple gesture, a shift in posture, a subtle directive to his aides could have interrupted the devastating narrative unfolding in the room. But Charles did nothing. He remained entirely passive, smiling politely at the Nigerian delegation, effectively abandoning Camilla to her public humiliation. This was the moment the psychological climax of her 30-year game reached its bitter end. Charles' silence was not born of malice, but of cold, calculating preservation. He understands a fundamental truth that Camilla has spent decades trying to ignore. The survival of the British crown no longer relies on him, and it certainly does not rely on her. It rests entirely on the shoulders of Prince William and Princess Catherine. By refusing to intervene, Charles silently signaled his submission to the new order. He chose the future of his dynasty over the fragile ego of his queen. To understand the absolute terror of Camilla's realization in that moment, we have to look past the diamonds and examine the staggering commercial desperation hiding beneath her royal titles. For years, Camilla operated under the illusion that securing the title of queen meant securing an empire. But titles are merely ink on parchment. In the ruthless billionaire-tier reality of the British monarchy, true power is measured in land, in sovereign grants, and in private real estate. And Camilla owns absolutely none of it. She does not control the sprawling, billion-dollar Duchy of Cornwall. William does. She does not own the private estates of Highgrove or Sandringham. She does not command the fiercely guarded independent wealth of the royal family. She is, for all her aggressive PR maneuvering and quiet demands for respect, entirely dependent on the institutional allowance granted to her by the system. When you strip away the deferential bows and the carefully orchestrated magazine covers, the reality of her position is profoundly fragile. If Charles were to pass away tomorrow, Camilla would be reduced to a dowager queen with zero institutional leverage. She would have no sovereign right to the palaces she currently dictates, no control over the royal purse strings, and no blood connection to the reigning monarch. Every attempt she made during Catherine's medical absence to elevate her own children and secure her financial legacy was driven by this exact panic. It was a scramble for collateral in a game where she holds no real cards. William and Anne watched this commercial desperation unfold, let her expose her intentions, and then weaponized the institution's protocol to remind her that she is a guest in a house she does not own. The aftermath of that banquet was not marked by explosive arguments, but by the quiet, brutal implementation of a new royal order. William and Catherine did not need to confront Camilla directly. They simply allowed the machinery of the palace to correct itself. And the signs of this correction are everywhere, if you know how to read them. What we began to see in the weeks following the Tiara incident were subtle, devastating shifts in protocol that erased Camilla's footprint. It was noticed in the way official photographs were suddenly staged, with Catherine and William consistently placed at the absolute center of visual gravity, while Camilla was quietly repositioned toward the margins. It was evident in the architectural language of the palaces themselves. Portraits of Camilla that had been subtly moved into primary viewing corridors were quietly rotated out, replaced by historically significant pieces that reinforced the direct bloodline. Even the access protocols shifted. Insiders noted that the administrative passes for Camilla's extended family, which had allowed them unprecedented VIP-level entry through the palace's main corridors, were quietly reviewed and downgraded. They were forced back into the standard side door entry procedures reserved for non-working royals and staff. This was not a petty slight. It was a masterful administrative execution. By using the exact bureaucratic systems Camilla had tried to exploit, William severed her access to the illusion of power. But perhaps the most agonizing psychological blow for Camilla is the inescapable daily presence of Diana's legacy, carried flawlessly by Catherine. It is not just the lover's knot tiara that haunts the queen consort. It is the 12-carat Salon sapphire engagement ring that never leaves Catherine's finger. Every time Catherine waves to a crowd, every time she signs a guest book, that sapphire flashes in the light, a permanent, undeniable reminder of the original Princess of Wales. Catherine wears it not as a weapon, but as a rightful inheritance. Yet against the backdrop of Camilla's desperate reach for legitimacy, Catherine's quiet dignity becomes the sharpest blade in the palace. She does not complain, she does not leak, she does not scramble for commercial deals or favorable press. She simply exists doing the work, honoring the grief of her husband, and projecting an aura of unshakable royalty that Camilla can never replicate. This is why the story of the Cambridge lover's knot resonates far beyond a single evening in Windsor Castle. It is not gossip. It is a masterclass in institutional warfare and the ultimate limits of manipulation. Camilla spent 3 decades attempting to rewrite history, believing that if she just held on long enough, she could replace the ghost that haunted her marriage. But the ghost did not just survive. It was inherited, protected, and weaponized by a son who refuses to let his mother's legacy be erased. In the end, Camilla achieved exactly what she set out to do. She got the marriage, she got the title, and she got the crown. But the crushing tragedy of her victory is the realization that the crown is empty. The power she coveted was a mirage slipping through her fingers the moment Catherine stepped into the light. The future of the British monarchy is firmly, undeniably in the hands of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and all Camilla can do now is stand quietly in her borrowed jewels, forced to watch as the empire she thought she conquered is handed back to the woman she tried to destroy. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the hidden dynamics of the royal institution. If you appreciate this level of forensic analysis and want to understand the real power plays happening behind closed doors, hit the subscribe button and join our community. We will see you in the next breakdown.